There's a moment most women remember, even if they never speak of it. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or announcement. It doesn't look like trauma. It might happen in front of a mirror, or in a stranger's gaze. Or maybe it happens quietly, over time, with no particular starting point. But one day, a girl begins to understand that the way she looks doesn't just belong to her. That her body, her face, her smile, they don't float freely in the world anymore. They are watched, not just seen, but measured, responded to, interpreted. And from that point forward, something invisible begins to shift inside her. The mirror is no longer a place of curiosity. It becomes a test, a tool, a reminder. She doesn't ask for the script. She doesn't sign up for the role. But still, somehow, it lands in her hands. Learn to smile just enough. Speak gently. Dress attractively, but not too much. Be approachable, not needy. Be confident, but only in the right ways. Be effortless, but be perfect. It's not written in any guidebook, but it's everywhere. In glances, compliments, silences. And the ones who notice it early often become the best at surviving it. They adapt quickly, not out of vanity, out of necessity. And the world applauds them for it, for being beautiful, charming, polished. But underneath, something quieter is happening, a slow erasure of the parts of her that don't fit the frame. No one told her outright that her value would be negotiated through beauty. They didn't have to. It was implied, modeled, passed down in the thousand gestures. The way her mother hesitated before stepping outside. The way compliments landed heavier than praise for kindness or creativity. The way the room shifted when she walked in wearing mascara. And somewhere between watching and becoming, she begins to perform. At first, it's small, a tug at the shirt hem, a softer tone, a second thought before speaking. But over time, the performance becomes seamless. So practiced, it starts to feel like truth. This isn't about hating beauty. Beauty can be joy. It can be celebration. But that's not the kind of beauty she's trained to hold. She's taught a beauty that behaves, that curates, that conforms. One that doesn't come from within, but is applied, sculpted, filtered, constantly refined. It looks like power, but it behaves like obedience. And the most painful part? It works. People respond. They lean in. They smile wider. They listen more closely. They reward the mask. And slowly, she learns to wear it without thinking, not because she's fake, but because it feels safer than being misunderstood. I've felt this too, the quiet pressure in the smallest of places, the pause before entering a room just to check how I might be received, the subtle calculation of posture, of voice, the wondering, is this too much, not enough? The feeling that being seen and being known are never quite the same thing. You start to realize that the more you're looked at, the less you're asked about. Your presence is noticed, but your depth is not. It's a strange thing, carrying a body that's been turned into a conversation, that people feel they can comment on, admire, assess, use to decide who you are without ever asking you. And over time, it begins to wear you down, not like a dramatic collapse, but like erosion, tiny moments, barely noticeable, that chip away at your center, until one day you're not sure whether your smile is yours or just a reflex, whether you laugh because it's funny or because it's expected, whether the image you see in the mirror is someone you chose to be or someone you built to be accepted. Carl Jung called this the persona, the version of ourselves we present to the world to survive, to belong. It's not inherently false. It's a necessary part of being human. But when the persona becomes too rigid, too rewarded, it can start to eclipse the self. And in that shadow lies the quiet ache of women everywhere who were praised for being beautiful, but rarely asked if they were okay, who were admired, but not heard, desired, but not known. And what about the girls who don't fit the mold, the ones who don't match the ideal but are still pulled into its orbit? They aren't spared. The pressure remains, only it takes another shape. A quiet striving, a soft, painful wondering, what would my life be if I looked like her? Would I be more loved, more seen, more safe? This is the paradox. Whether you meet the standard or fall short of it, you're still trapped inside it. You're still chasing a moving target. You're still measuring your worth in reflections. The system is clever. It doesn't shout at you, it whispers. It suggests. It wraps the demand in soft words: self-care, glow, transformation. It tells you you're empowered while handing you a script to follow. And if you ever grow tired, if you ever ask, what if I just stopped trying? The silence that follows is louder than any rejection. Because in a world that rewards the performance, stepping off stage feels like disappearing. But what if that silence isn't rejection? What if it's a doorway, a threshold, the start of something slower, softer, more real? That's what no one tells you, that maybe the collapse isn't the end. Maybe it's the beginning. Maybe that day when the attention that once felt flattering starts to feel like pressure, that's your psyche whispering, enough. Maybe the fatigue isn't laziness, maybe it's grief. The grief of abandoning parts of yourself just to be liked, just to be chosen, just to be enough. There's a moment, small, unspectacular, when you realize the clothes you wear don't feel like you. The hair you style doesn't bring joy. The smile you offer feels hollow. And you start to wonder, who am I when I'm not being looked at? Who am I when I'm not performing? It's not a grand declaration. No one else may notice. But something inside begins to soften. You skip the makeup. You speak a little louder. You stop fixing the photo before posting. Not because you figured it all out, but because you're tired of the script. Because there's a voice that's been quiet for too long, and it's finally starting to speak. Maybe this voice doesn't come with confidence right away. Maybe it trembles. Maybe it second guesses. But it's yours. It's real. And it doesn't need approval to exist. And in that moment, beneath the quiet panic, beneath the questioning, there's a strange kind of peace. Not the peace of perfection, but the peace of not pretending, not performing, not apologizing for the space you take up. You begin to notice things differently, not how others look at you, but how you feel looking at yourself. You start asking better questions, not, do they like me like this, but do I feel like myself like this? And the answers, at first, are messy, complicated, but they're also honest. And that's where healing begins, not in reclaiming beauty, but in reclaiming your own gaze.
Sometimes what looks like grace is just someone who's learned to be careful, who's learned to read the room before she reads herself, who adjusts her tone mid-sentence because she saw a flicker of disapproval on someone's face, who softens her words not because they were wrong, but because she's been taught that too much truth makes people uncomfortable. And somewhere along the way, that woman begins to forget how it felt to speak without editing. She doesn't remember when it started. Maybe it was a compliment that sounded like correction. Maybe it was the way approval came faster when she looked a certain way. Maybe it was watching her mother hold her breath in front of the mirror, joking about her age, then checking one more time if her outfit was okay. Maybe it was quiet, unremarkable. But that's the thing about adaptation. It's often invisible, even to the one doing it. And so the inheritance begins, not through lectures or warnings, but through glances, hesitations, smiles that stretch a little too wide. A daughter learns from her mother how to survive a world that prizes appearance, not by being told, but by watching. Watching how beauty can soften rejection, how it buys a little more safety, how it becomes a kind of armor. But what happens when the armor gets heavy? When the shield becomes the only thing people see? What happens when you've spent so long trying to be pleasing that you forget what it feels like to just be? It's easy to think of beauty as light, as celebration. But in this system, beauty is labor. Beauty is calculation. Beauty is the daily task of being lovable before you open your mouth. And the strange thing is, when you do it well, no one sees the effort. They just call it charm, poise, elegance, as if it was effortless, as if it didn't cost anything. And yet, for many women, it costs everything. The constant self-surveillance. The way you pose a little differently if someone's watching. The way you avoid eating too much in public. The way you apologize with your body, crossing your arms, making yourself smaller, smiling too quickly to smooth tension. Not because you're weak, but because somewhere inside you believe that being liked is safer than being right. Jung spoke of the shadow, not just the parts of us that are dark, but the parts we hide, the pieces of our truth we exile in order to be accepted. For so many women, the shadow isn't just anger or jealousy. It's authenticity. It's the full emotional range that doesn't fit the image, the rage that doesn't sound pretty, the grief that isn't graceful, the truth that doesn't feel palatable. So it gets buried, beneath good posture, beneath soft laughter, beneath decades of playing the role of the one who has it all together. But what they call composure might be detachment. What they call confidence might be exhaustion. And what they call beauty might be obedience, disguised as empowerment. And still, the world keeps applauding. Because the performance works. It earns attention. It earns praise. And over time, she begins to craft her entire life around that applause. But the cost isn't just emotional. It's spiritual. Because the more she plays the role, the more distant she becomes from herself. Sometimes this disconnect doesn't show up dramatically. There's no collapse, no dramatic unraveling, just a low hum of dissatisfaction. A sense that you're watching your life from the outside, that your body is present, but your soul is elsewhere. You're smiling, but you feel like a photograph, curated, lit well, but somehow flat. And still, you carry on, because stopping feels dangerous, because choosing not to perform might mean losing everything the performance once brought. But over time, the script becomes unbearable. You forget which parts of you are real and which were rehearsed. You wonder if anyone has ever loved the unpolished version of you, or if even you have. This is the heartbreak of the pretty girl paradox. Not that beauty is painful, but that it becomes the condition of your belonging. Not that you don't want to be seen, but that being seen feels conditional. You become known not as a person, but as a projection. Desired, envied, admired, but rarely understood. Characters like Michelle from Skins or Maddie from Euphoria, they embody this illusion, confident on the outside, polished, composed. But inside there's fragility, a longing to be held without being assessed, a desire to be raw without being punished. And often the moment they stop performing is the moment they become invisible, or worse, attacked. This is the part no one names. that desirability isn't the same as safety, that being looked at doesn't mean being loved, that admiration can feel like control when you realize it depends on staying within the lines, and that the moment you deviate by aging, by gaining weight, by speaking your truth, by asking for more, the applause turns to silence, or judgment, or shame. So you shrink, you soften, you return to the role, not because it feels good, but because it feels safer than being free. And yet, in the quiet corners of your life, maybe in your bedroom, maybe on a walk alone, maybe after crying in the shower, you hear a small voice. It doesn't sound like rebellion. It sounds like relief. It says, you can stop now. Not because you're healed, not because you're certain, but because pretending has started to hurt more than it helps. This is the beginning of undoing. Not a makeover, not a reinvention, but a soft unraveling. A moment where you choose comfort over curation, where you stop adjusting your reflection and start listening to what's underneath it, where you give yourself permission to be unfinished, unfiltered, and unremarkable, and realize that's where your aliveness lives. The world won't reward you for this. It might not even notice, but something in you will. Something that has been waiting, not for you to become more, but for you to become whole.
There's a kind of tired that sleep doesn't touch. A weariness that lives in the bones, not from running, but from pretending. From holding yourself together in all the right ways for all the wrong reasons. From smiling when you feel like crying. From agreeing when silence would have been more honest. From making yourself beautiful, likable, palatable. Because somewhere deep inside, you believe that being easy to love is safer than being real. For some women, this exhaustion arrives slowly, over years. For others, it shows up all at once. A conversation that hits too close. A comment that pierces something unhealed. A day when she looks in the mirror and doesn't recognize the person reflected back. Not because she's changed, but because she's never truly seen herself unfiltered. Not just in appearance, in essence. This moment isn't dramatic. It's not a breakdown. It's more like a soft collapse, a quiet surrender. She doesn't shout, she doesn't rage. She simply stops. Not out of power, but out of depletion. She stops fixing her hair, stops performing agreement, stops bending herself to be received. She begins to say no without apology. Not to be difficult, just because she's finally learned that peace doesn't come from being adored. It comes from being whole. In Jungian psychology, this rupture is known as the breaking point of dissonance, the moment when the tension between the false self and the true self becomes unbearable, when the performance cracks and the self, long buried, begins to stir, not as a revelation, not even as clarity, just as a whisper. I want to belong to myself again. At first, that voice is awkward, unsteady. It doesn't come with certainty. In fact, it comes with grief. Because letting go of the image also means letting go of the rewards it brought, the attention, the comfort, the illusion of control. But somewhere in that letting go, there's also a strange kind of freedom, a spaciousness, a permission to just be. She no longer measures her worth by how many heads she turns. She no longer curates her life like a catalog. She wears what feels soft, eats what feels kind, lets herself age, ache, unravel. Not because she's given up, but because she's tired of chasing a version of herself that was never hers to begin with. She stops editing her photos, not to make a point, but because she doesn't want to. She cancels a plan and doesn't explain why. She looks in the mirror and doesn't immediately search for something to fix. And though these gestures seem small, they are sacred. They are revolutions disguised as ordinary acts of rest. But this isn't a self-help story. There's no glow-up waiting at the end. No secret routine that will make everything easy. This is about mourning the years spent shrinking, the laughter that wasn't real, the apologies that were never owed. This is about forgiving the girl who thought she had to be perfect to be safe, the one who smiled through discomfort, who asked for less to be loved more. She was never weak. She was surviving. And now, maybe for the first time, she doesn't want to survive anymore. She wants to live. Not as someone's fantasy, not as an ideal, but as herself. Messy, moody, beautiful, even when no one's watching. There's still noise, of course. The world hasn't changed just because she has. The beauty industry still whispers promises dressed in soft fonts. Social media still rewards the image over the soul. But she's different now. She sees through it. She knows that empowerment, when sold to her by the very systems that once erased her, isn't empowerment. It's obedience, dressed as self-love. And she doesn't want it anymore. Because what she wants can't be found in a bottle or a filter or a trend. What she wants is to come home to herself, to her real body, her real rhythm, her real voice. She wants to be free in a way that has nothing to do with appearance. Free to rest, free to age, free to take up space without apologizing for it. Free to walk into a room and not adjust her smile to match someone else's comfort. Free to fail without feeling ugly. Free to cry without feeling dramatic. Free to exist without an audience. And slowly, she learns that she can. The world won't always make it easy. There will still be rooms where she's misunderstood, still voices that try to shrink her back into a version they can explain. But she's no longer performing. She's choosing. And every time she chooses herself, she builds something quiet, but indestructible. A sense of inner ground that doesn't need decoration. A beauty that doesn't need approval. A truth that doesn't need to be translated. This isn't the kind of confidence they sell you. It isn't loud. It doesn't sparkle. It won't make you popular, but it will make you whole. And maybe that's the real paradox. That in a world obsessed with being pretty, the most beautiful thing you can be is unafraid to be real. Not perfect, not pleasing, just real. So, if you've ever felt tired of the mirror, tired of the pretending, tired of smiling through silence, know that you're not alone. And more importantly, know that there's nothing wrong with you. You were never broken. You were just handed a script that didn't fit. And you're allowed to put it down now. You're allowed to be more than someone else's reflection, more than a curated image, more than a quiet, smiling girl in the corner of someone else's story. You are allowed to take up space, without adjusting, without explaining, without earning it. And if that feels impossible today, just know this. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is to simply begin. Begin by being kind to the parts of you that don't perform well. Begin by listening when you want to disappear. Begin by loving yourself, not the version you built, but the one beneath it, the one who's been waiting, the one who's still here, even now, still whole, still worthy, still yours.